Clock time is 10:52. The Labour Party conference is about more than just the MPs coming together and hearing from the ministers. It is a proper meeting of the Labour movement. One of the biggest parts of the Labour movement is, of course, the trade unions, and they don't come any bigger than Unite. The General Secretary of Unite, one of Labour's biggest financial backers, Sharon Graham, is joining us in the little conference salon now. Sharon Graham, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
First Labour conference since 2009. Big moment for the Labour Party, in government, I should say. Big moment for the trade union movement. How excited are you?
Well, look, I mean, I think we have to mark the moment. This is the first time in 15 years that we have had a Prime Minister, a Labour Prime Minister, addressing us at conference. I mean, I don't think we should underestimate that. That is a huge opportunity. But I am disappointed at some of the decisions that have been made early doors. Of course, the winter fuel allowance is a decision that I think is wrong, that should be reversed. I don't think people actually understand how could a Labour government decide to take away the winter fuel allowance from pensioners but not touch the very, very wealthy. I'm also seriously concerned about jobs and working class communities, deindustrialisation and lack of investment. So I've got some real concerns, but of course, you know, we're in buoyant mood in the sense that we're here. Now we need to do some of the hard work on decisions.
Do you know what Keir Starmer's vision for the country is?
Well, look, what I think is that he's got good intent. I think that he wants to do good things, but you cannot just be a better manager. You can't just manage what we've got better. You have to have a vision, and I would like them to be much more like the 1945 government. You know, we keep hearing about fiscal rules. In 1945, we had a 270% debt to GDP, and there was no tightening of belts. We built the National Health Service. We said that people needed to have a fairer society. I want them to channel that a little bit more than some of the things that they're saying.
You're trying to put a motion down on the floor around winter fuel. Just explain what you're trying to do.
Well, look, we're trying to get onto the conference floor. It's not always easy, I have to tell you.
No.
Onto the conference floor.
16,
Composite 16, yeah. Ruled in, ruled out. But anyway, we're nearly there. We think it's going to get onto the floor. Onto the conference floor, looking to say that we think they should reverse the winter fuel decision, that it was a wrong decision, do a U-turn on it, reverse it. But also talking about them ruling out austerity, Mark II, and also critically for me, talking about investment in jobs in Britain.
Of course, if you were to get it onto the floor, which is barrier 1, but also if it were to be successful, which is barrier 2, it would be non-binding. The government wouldn't have to listen to it. If you manage to succeed in getting it onto the floor and pass, and the government were to ignore it anyway, what would your reaction be to that?
Well, look, I think the whole point of having conference is that you are hearing more than what happens in the cabinet, and you're hearing more than what happens in some of the smaller meetings. And actually, if this conference floor is representative of the country, it should sail through. But as you know, conference floors aren't always like that. There's a lot of gerrymandering that goes on, a whole range of things. But if they choose to ignore, forget what's happening in conference. If they choose to ignore what people are saying outside, this is a massively hot topic. I'm getting emails, I'm inundated about this winter fuel allowance and investment in jobs in Britain. If they choose to ignore it, then I think they will have pain at the ballot box. First of all, they've got the Scottish elections coming up very shortly. Then they'll have by-elections coming up. I mean,
local elections in May.
Local elections in May. This is such an unusual thing that they've done. This is the Labour government who've come in to make change, and the first thing they thought was a good idea is to pick the pockets of pensioners. There's a problem with that.
Are you convinced? You talk about austerity. Prime Minister's given an interview today where he said there'll be no return to austerity. Are you convinced by that?
Well, I suppose if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I tend to think it's a duck. I mean, the problem you've got is that all of the conversation he's having, tightening the belts, tough decisions, what does that mean? So there's two things for me. If you want to repair the public services, you're going to need money. If you want to invest in jobs so that we don't have a jobless transition, you're going to need money. Where's the money coming from? I can't see how they can do those things and keep to the phony fiscal rules that they're keeping.
So you're not convinced by the Prime Minister's assurance about austerity this morning?
Well, action will speak louder than words. I'll need to see what that means. They'll have to show what they mean by that. You can't say in the one hand we're going to bring debt down in this Parliament and we're going to have jobs for the future and we're going to deal with the public sector if there is no money.
But I suppose he would say that. Well, I suppose he would say that one way in which clearly the government has not or has moved away from austerity is by having generous public sector pay supplements, which he's done, and ended the strikes and so on.
Well, what I would say to that is, who made the decision that you had to pit pensioners against workers? Who made that choice?
Well, they would say that's just fiscal reality.
Well, it isn't fiscal reality, because the reality about fiscal rules is they change all the time. These fiscal rules have changed 9 times since 1997. 9 times. Now, if we're not going to borrow to invest, if Britain's not going to borrow to invest, what's going to happen to oil and gas workers? We've just had last week Grangemouth announce that they're going to shut down the last refinery in Scotland. And that should be a refinery that stays open for sustainable air fuel. Why is there no money going into that refinery to keep that refinery open? Why aren't we the investor of first resort? The difficulty you have is you can have all these ideas, but if there's no money, you are not going to be able to execute.
Are you concerned, just actually on that, on North Sea oil and gas, given what happened at Grangemouth, are you concerned that Labour government policy is going to accelerate the shutting down of North Sea oil and gas industry?
Yes, because what I think is happening is you've got one side of the equation is we want net zero. I don't know anybody that doesn't think that's a good idea. Of course, everybody thinks that's a good idea. But on the other side of that equation, you must have, what does the transition look like? Look, Germany have got a £580 billion transition pot, 15% of their GDP, and we've got 7.3 billion. It's a joke.
Do you think that Ed Miliband needs to look again at the changes the Labour government have brought in terms of no further exploration of North Sea oil and gas reserves?
Well, I don't know how you can say that you're going to stop North Sea licences when you don't have a plan in place, A, for jobs, and B, for replacing that type of energy.
And you don't think they've got a plan?
Well, I haven't seen a plan, and I represent most of the energy workers. I mean, I am the biggest union in the North Sea, and I can't see a plan. Now, we've put a plan forward. We could be a big manufacturer in wind power, no doubt about it. We've just spoken about an auction where we've got, turbines, etc., in the North Sea for offshore wind. But we're not building the turbines, we're buying the turbines from other countries. Why can't we build these turbines and have 35,000 jobs to replace the jobs in the North Sea?
Sounds like what you're saying. I mean, the government's, on the basis of what you're saying, is being pretty irresponsible with regards to the North Sea. If they're not going to have a plan, if those jobs are going to disappear, and not to, in your view, have a plan to replace them, that sounds pretty irresponsible.
Well, it's completely naive at best. I mean, the reality is you can't say on one side we want to have net zero, and then on the other side of that not know how you're going to replace it for energy security in the first instance, for jobs also. And so what I'm saying, and I've had this plan laid down for the best part of 2 years before they got into power, is that if you are going to have these jobs go in the North Sea, you must have replacement for them in terms of energy and in terms of those jobs. Wind power is an obvious thing that we should be pushing and that we should be leading Europe in.
Do you think that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and so on should have accepted donations for clothing?
Well, look, what I think that they should have done, leading is by example, what they should have done, when I became the General Secretary of Unite, one of the first things I did within weeks was to put in a gifts and hospitality policy, that nobody was able to accept gifts or hospitality all the way through the union. And I did that because I thought it was an important thing for me to lead the way. Now, it happened before I became General Secretary. It hasn't happened since I've become General Secretary. And I think what he should do is put a policy in like that, maybe do it across the House, because this is damaging to politics, because everyone's now thinking they're all the same. They're not all the same, actually. I think Labour want to do a good job, but that has been a damaging set of circumstances.
Are you concerned? There is said that there are tensions between the Business Secretary and the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, around the government's plans on workers' rights, and that there is tension between them and there could be further dilution. Are you concerned about a potential further dilution of the government's proposals on workers' rights?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I meet them both. I met Angela yesterday with Keir, and I've met Johnny, and I haven't seen any tensions between them both.
So you think that's just overwritten?
I think that is overwritten. What I do think, though, is I think this rights bill on employment rights could be an absolute game changer for workers if we get it right. The problem here is that on some of the key areas, like net zero-hour contracts, on fire and rehire, on rights from day one, it feels as though there's a watering down. Now, we haven't seen the draft yet, so this is coming in 28 days and we're yet to see the draft. The words on the page are going to matter. An example, fire and rehire is really important. If you give a loophole to say if a company's in a particular set of circumstances they can fire and rehire, then bad companies will do that. There's no doubt about it. You either ban it or you don't ban it. You can't have a halfway house on something like that. So I'm going to be really interested to see the words.
Would you like to see, I mean, in terms of one way of dealing with donations, you could have state funding political parties, take donors out of it altogether, perhaps even take the unions out. Do
Well, look, the unions have got a long history in terms of supporting Labour. They are the voice of workers, and our donations are, per member and in a very different way. But what I do think here is that the public have to see transparency, and they have to say, actually, does that feel right? Does it feel right that a millionaire can give people clothes? Does it feel right that this can happen in this particular way? And if it doesn't feel right, then just don't do it. That's why in my own union, I did it within weeks of coming in, because I knew that that isn't something that should happen. And really, Labour should just bite the bullet, get on with that, and let's move on to the issues that people really care about. Jobs, no austerity Mark 2, and get rid of the winter fuel allowance cut that they have introduced.
Marks out of 10 for the start of the new government, Sharon?
Well, could do better, I think I would say. Could do better.
Requires improvement, to use the old Ofsted.
Requires improvement. I mean, they've got the capability to actually make massive change in this country. They've really got a moment here. And if they don't get it right, then people will move into other arenas. What they need to do now is to bite the bullet, do the U-turn on winter fuel, and crack on with running the country.
Do you agree with Diane Abbott, who said that Keir Starmer is in the pocket of millionaires?
Well, look, what I agree is that what Keir Starmer needs to do is have more of a vision for Britain. I think he needs to move away from this managerial style, which is we're going to do things better and tick things off better. And let me tell you, they couldn't possibly do it any worse than what the Tories is. Let's not let them off the hook here. They left a mess behind, and we're trying to pick that mess up. But you cannot deal with this mess unless you have a vision for Britain. They need to go back and think, what is their vision for Britain, and then put the money behind delivery.
So when he speaks just finally on Tuesday, what do you want to hear from the Prime Minister?
Well, I would like to hear him do a reverse on the winter fuel payment. I'd like him to rule out austerity, and I absolutely want him to show the plan for jobs. They are not going to get people to buy into net zero unless they can show that there are jobs there.
Sharon Graham, General Secretary of Unite, thanks so much for joining us.